I wasn't always a fighter. 10 years ago, I was just a tired single mother working 2 jobs, counting change at gas pumps and praying my daughter wouldn't outgrow her winter coat before spring came. Back then, I didn't raise my voice. I kept my head down, followed the rules, tried not to make waves. But life doesn't always let you stay quiet. Not when the people around you are hurting. Not when you see good families getting torn apart because someone in power decided they don't belong. My name is Caroline Hayes. I'm 40 years old. A mother, a neighbor, and a woman who spent every spare hour these past 5 years trying to keep the vulnerable in our town from falling through the cracks. I help run a food pantry out of an old church basement. I organize rides to doctor's appointments, write grant applications after midnight, hand out coats in January, and keep lists of who needs diapers, who just lost a job, who hasn't eaten in 2 days, and I've never been arrested in my life. Until that morning IT was the second Monday of April. The air had a sharp bite, but spring was beginning to peek through the cold. Daffodils had started blooming near the sidewalks, bright and defiant. I arrived early, bundled in my green coat, the same one I'd worn during last winter's coat drive. I had my usual satchel slung over my shoulder, packed with flyers, hand warmers, and granola bars. We weren't doing anything radical. Just standing outside City Hall with signs and chants, asking for a vote to protect immigrant families from sudden detainment. It was legal. Peaceful. I had the permit in my bag, stamped and signed by the city clerk. We had children there. Grandparents. Clergy. There was a woman in a wheelchair holding a sign that said, "My home is here." I was standing next to Rosa, one of the bravest women I know, when the patrol cars roared in like thunder. I remember thinking it was a mistake. That they'd just passed by. They didn't. The sirens blared so loudly they rattled the windows of the corner bakery. Uniformed deputies spilled out of their cars, forming a line, voices booming through megaphones, demanding that we clear the area. People started murmuring. One woman began crying. I reached into my bag, fingers closing around the permit. I raised my voice calmly. "We have the right to be here. This is a lawful assembly." A deputy shoved me back before I could say anything more. His grip was rough. The plastic cuffs dug into my wrists with a sickening snap. Someone yelled my name. Another grabbed my arm. My phone hit the pavement and slid under the patrol car. My breath caught in my throat as they pinned me against the hood of the vehicle, the metal cold through my coat. I didn't struggle. But my heart raced as if I had. I caught a glimpse of Sheriff Clay Rourke standing across the street, hands in his coat pockets, watching the chaos with a look that could only be described as satisfaction. The cameras were already flashing. A news van had arrived minutes earlier. He knew. He had planned it. He'd found his moment. Within hours, my mugshot was posted everywhere, on TV, online, even pinned to a corkboard outside the sheriff's office. It didn't matter that the charges were nonsense. It didn't matter that I had a permit. All that mattered was the image, a local activist, handcuffed, face flushed, framed as a threat. The official charge sheet read, incitement to riot, obstruction of justice, and endangering public peace. There had been no riot, no threat, not even a single overturned sign. Just fear and power and a sheriff who wanted to make sure people like me never dared speak again. By evening, news anchors were calling me a danger to public stability. Rourke gave a press conference flanked by deputies, painting me as the mastermind of a larger movement, intent on disrupting civic order. I watched it on a grainy television through the iron bars of my holding cell, fists clenched, jaw locked, and no one asked for my side of the story. They didn't need to. The narrative had already been decided. I was released on bail around midnight. No one waited for me outside. My phone was cracked, the screen barely responsive. I called Rosa. She answered in a whisper. "Are you okay?" she asked. I told her I was fine, though the truth was harder to admit. I was humiliated, angry, and scared. The next morning, I noticed the silence before I noticed the damage. My inbox was flooded not with support, but with cancellations. One local grocer ended our donation partnership, effective immediately. A dental office pulled out of our children's health fair. 3 employers I'd been consulting with for part-time work sent polite, copied and pasted emails thanking me for my contributions, but informing me that, given the current controversy, they could no longer continue our arrangement. Even the school's PTA suspended my membership pending further review. Everywhere I went, heads turned. A cashier at the hardware store refused to make eye contact. An old neighbor crossed the street to avoid me. Friends I'd known for years stopped returning my calls. IT wasn't just a hit to my name. It was a hit to my wallet. And when you live month to month, paycheck to grocery bag, even one disruption can feel like a landslide. By the end of the week, I was short on rent, behind on utilities, and fielding calls from grant funders with suddenly very different attitudes. That's how it works when you're not rich. When the narrative flips, it flips fast. The town that once called you a hero now whispers, troublemaker. The places that once welcomed you now lock the doors. And if you've built your life around service, volunteering, donations, community trust, it doesn't take long to lose everything. I sat at my kitchen table that Saturday night, the lights off to save power, my daughter asleep in the next room. I watched the shadow of the mailbox on the sidewalk. I thought about every woman I'd ever helped escape a bad situation. Every parent I'd driven to court. Every teenager I'd defended in front of school boards and administrators. I thought about what it meant to fight for people who had no one else, and now I had no one. I'd been isolated, shamed, discredited, but not defeated because I knew the truth. This wasn't about what happened that morning. It was about something bigger. I had been too loud for too long, too visible, too inconvenient. And Clay Rourke, man of the hour, county's golden son, media darling in a uniform, had found a way to shut me up without ever laying a finger on me. He'd used the system the way men like him always do. With a smile and a badge, but he'd also made one mistake. He underestimated how dangerous someone like me becomes when they lose everything. He thought the mugshot would ruin me. He didn't realize it would light the fuse. So I sat there, alone in the quiet dark, and I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't crumble. I began to plan. Because if Rourke wanted to play a long game, he was about to learn I knew how to play it better. I wasn't going to disappear. I wasn't going to back down, and I wasn't going to stay silent. Not anymore. Some mornings I woke up and forgot, for a moment, how quickly everything had changed, but the silence reminded me. The silence of my phone. The silence of once friendly neighbors who now walked past without a word. The silence in rooms I used to fill with energy, now colder, emptier, smaller. After my arrest, life didn't go back to normal. It rewrote itself around the edges of suspicion and judgment. People who had stood beside me just weeks earlier now avoided my gaze. My daughter, Maya, only 13, asked me if we had done something wrong. And I lied. I told her we were fine. I smiled through the pain, made pancakes, packed lunches, and walked her to the bus stop like nothing had happened. But inside, I wasn't fine. I was burning. The food pantry, my pride, my mission, barely held together. Half our suppliers stopped delivering. The landlord left a voicemail saying rent had to be paid in full or eviction was next. Volunteers dropped out. The grant committee postponed our application pending review. I found myself restocking shelves alone at night, praying someone would walk in so I didn't feel invisible, and no one did. On the outside, I wore calm like armor. I told anyone who asked that I was working things out, that we'd weather it. But every night, I sat at my kitchen table with a stack of bills and a legal pad filled with scribbled notes, names, dates, quotes, anything that might help me fight back, because this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about power. Rourke's face was everywhere. Smiling on local morning shows. Shaking hands at ribbon cuttings. Talking about law and order and protecting traditional values. He had taken our town's fear and turned it into a campaign slogan. And somehow, people were buying it. But I'd seen behind the curtain. I'd seen the rage he carried beneath the polished image. The way he looked at people like me, as if we were a problem to be solved, not human beings with lives and dignity. And I realized that if no one stopped him, he wouldn't stop at me. So I started documenting. Quietly. Carefully. I took screenshots. I recorded public meetings. I transcribed every interview he gave, every press conference where he smoothed over another complaint with a practiced grin. I talked to people, quietly at first. An EMT who had seen deputies rough up a teenager. A teacher whose student disappeared after an encounter with local law enforcement. A former employee at the courthouse who heard whispers about missing funds. One night, long after Maya had gone to bed, I opened an encrypted email account and sent everything I had to 3 different civil rights groups. I didn't sign my name. I just called myself Ren. It was terrifying, but it was a start. I wasn't ready to show my face again. Not yet. Not until I had something that could hold up under scrutiny. Something that couldn't be swept away by spin or politics or fear. I knew how quickly a narrative could shift, and I knew Rourke was already rewriting mine. He portrayed me as reckless, dangerous, a threat to public peace. Even the word activist became a stain, not a strength. I let him believe I'd gone quiet. That I'd learned my lesson. But while he stood at podiums and posed for cameras, I was building a case, and every story I uncovered made the mask I wore heavier. There were nights I didn't sleep. Nights I lay awake wondering if this was the life I wanted Maya to inherit, one where standing up meant getting knocked down so hard you couldn't breathe. I wanted her to believe in justice. I wanted her to know courage mattered. But I also wanted her safe. One day, she found one of my notebooks open on the kitchen counter. She flipped through pages of handwritten notes, newspaper clippings, phone numbers. I caught her standing there, reading silently. She looked up at me and said, "Are you still fighting him?" I didn't lie this time. "Yes," I said. She nodded. Then she walked away and came back with a stack of her own school notebooks. "You can use mine too," she said. "I have extra." That night, something shifted in me. I wasn't just trying to clear my name anymore. I was fighting for her future. For all the children growing up in this town believing power was always right, and silence was always safest. I reached out to a journalist in Chicago who had once interviewed me about food insecurity in the Midwest. I used a friend's address and a burner phone. I told her everything. She didn't respond right away, but 2 weeks later she called. She had verified the details. Found sources of her own. Read the documents. Heard the recordings. She believed me. "I think you have something big here," she said. We talked for hours. I gave her more names. She connected the dots I couldn't. And soon we were no longer just telling my story. We were pulling back the curtain on something far wider, far deeper, a network of abuse, a pattern of misconduct, and a sheriff who had grown too used to not being questioned. Why now? It had been nearly 4 months since my arrest. Rourke was already gearing up for re-election. But behind the polished speeches and photo ops, his machine was starting to creak. He didn't know it yet, but the mask he wore was beginning to crack. I got used to hiding in plain sight. Going to the market at odd hours. Avoiding familiar faces. At community events, I stood at the edge of the crowd, listening instead of leading. My public voice was gone, but my private one had never been louder. Some days I hated the secrecy. I missed speaking freely, calling things by their names. But then I would remember what I was working toward. And I would tighten the mask again. One afternoon, I got a call from the civil rights organization I had contacted weeks earlier. They had begun compiling reports, similar cases from other counties, people silenced or pushed out for questioning authority. One lawyer told me, "There's a pattern. You're not the only one." That sentence stayed with me. It reminded me that this wasn't about ego. It wasn't about revenge. It was about a pattern. A broken system that punished the people it was supposed to protect. If I could help break it, even just a little, I had to try. The journalist from Chicago, her name was Lena, visited our town in secret. We met in the back of a bookstore 2 towns over. She brought a voice recorder, a notepad, and a promise. "I'll tell this right. But it won't be easy." I nodded. Nothing about this has been. By the end of that week, she had enough. Enough to write. Enough to expose. But still, we waited. We waited for the story to be airtight. For the documentation to be reviewed, checked, verified. We waited because we knew the blowback would come fast and hard, and it did. When the exposé was finally published, it hit like a thunderclap. But that's for the next part. IT didn't make the front page at first. The exposé landed quietly, tucked into the second half of a weekday edition of an independent online outlet. But within hours, it started to spread. People shared it not because it was dramatic, but because it was undeniable. It was fact after fact, laid out with receipts, names, dates, documents, quotes. One accusation could be brushed off. But 20? 50? 100? That was different. The article started with my arrest, but it didn't end there. It listed cases going back 5 years, instances of Sheriff Rourke using his office to silence critics, redirect funding, and disproportionately target certain communities. There were photos, testimonies, financial records, legal documents that had somehow never been made public. One former deputy even went on record saying, "We were told who to watch, who to stop, who to ignore." It was the kind of journalism that didn't ask for permission. By the end of the first day, local radio stations were reading excerpts on air. By the second, city council members were being cornered for comment. The mayor's office released a vague statement about ongoing reviews. And Rourke? He held a press conference in front of the courthouse, surrounded by American flags and stone-faced deputies. "I've always served this community with honor," he said. "And I will not be distracted by politically motivated attacks." He looked right into the cameras when he said it. I watched from my living room, Maya sitting next to me, her legs curled up beneath her. She didn't say anything. She just stared. He denied everything, brushed it all off. Then, without saying my name, he suggested that the person behind it had a history of disorder and an obvious grudge. I knew he meant me. He wanted people to see the story as revenge, as bitterness, as noise, but this time, people didn't turn away. I started getting calls, messages, from neighbors, from former volunteers, from women I'd helped years ago. "I believe you," they said. I read the article. I knew something was off about him. But not all the messages were supportive, some were cruel. Others frightening. One morning, someone spray-painted the word liar across my front door. That night, Maya asked if we could sleep in the same room. Still, I didn't flinch, because I had known this would happen. I had prepared for it. The exposure came with a cost, but so did silence. And for the first time since that cold morning outside City Hall, I wasn't hiding anymore. Rourke's image began to crack. The stories multiplied. A retired judge came forward with concerns about pressured rulings. A local nonprofit director shared emails showing redirected grant money. One county commissioner resigned, citing moral conflict. And then the lawsuits began. Civil rights groups filed for records. A former deputy filed a formal complaint. Investigations opened. Subpoenas followed. The sheriff's office stopped holding public meetings altogether. Still, Rourke didn't back down. He doubled down. He said it was all fabricated, that outsiders were trying to dismantle Midwestern values. He blamed the media. He blamed the internet. He blamed activists. He blamed me. He gave an interview saying I had manipulated vulnerable people and incited division. He called me a threat to public cohesion. The same man who arrested me for holding a sign was now accusing me of tearing the town apart. But here's what he didn't understand. It was already broken. He just kept painting over the cracks. The pressure grew. He couldn't control it anymore. Not the press. Not the people. Not the law. And when the state attorney general announced a formal investigation into his conduct, I knew we had reached a turning point. But it wasn't a victory. Not it was only the beginning of something far more dangerous. One night, just after sunset, I noticed a black SUV idling outside my house for over an hour. I stepped outside and stared at it, arms crossed, until it drove off slowly, silently, down the street. That week, I stopped letting Maya walk anywhere alone. I changed the locks. I checked my rearview mirror more than once each time I left the house. I didn't say it out loud, But part of me wondered if he would try to retaliate more directly, because a man like Rourke doesn't just lose power. He fights to keep it. That was the real danger now. Not just legal backlash, but desperation. A man who built his identity on control doesn't let go without trying to crush whatever stands in his way, and I had become that thing. One afternoon, I met with Lena, the journalist, at a public library outside town. She looked tired, drained, but focused. She showed me the traffic numbers on the article, over 2 million views. National outlets had picked it up. Other reporters had started calling. More sources were coming forward. We sat in a corner table, hushed, heads low. "He's going to hit back harder," I said. She nodded. "He already is." But I wasn't the only one standing anymore. Community organizers in other counties reached out to me. Legal advisors offered their services pro bono. Someone from a national civil rights fund called to say they were watching closely and would intervene if needed. A senator released a statement supporting an urgent and independent review. The walls were closing in on Rourke, but the tighter they got, the louder he roared. His last town hall was streamed live. Half the chairs were empty. His speech was more rant than reassurance. He shouted about betrayal, about the weaponization of emotion, about how the community was under attack from within. And still, he never said my name, not once, but I could feel it in every word. His eyes darted. His voice cracked, and for the first time, people noticed. Even the loyal ones. AT school, Maya came home saying her teacher had pulled her aside just to check in. That had never happened before. She said some of her classmates had started defending me when others whispered. "They said what you did was brave." I didn't cry when she told me that, but I wanted to, because I realized something in that moment. Something that stayed with me. This wasn't just about exposing corruption anymore. IT was about reclaiming the story. For every mother who had felt silenced. For every teenager who thought they had no voice. For every town that looked the other way while someone in power decided who mattered and who didn't. We had ripped off the mask, but the man behind it was still dangerous, and the real fight had only just begun. There was no silence when I walked into the courthouse. Every footstep echoed. Every camera flashed. Reporters lined the steps, shouting questions I didn't answer. My lawyer kept a firm hand on my back, guiding me forward as if I might stop walking. But I didn't. I couldn't. Not now. Inside, the air was cold and dry. The walls were tall, beige, lined with flags and framed portraits of judges past. I took my seat near the front, just behind the prosecutor's table. Across the aisle, surrounded by a cluster of lawyers and supporters in dark suits, sat Sheriff Clay Rourke. He didn't look like a man under investigation. He looked like someone arriving at a campaign rally. His jaw was tight, his tie flawless. When he looked my way, it wasn't with shame. It was with calculation. The kind of look that doesn't see a person, just an obstacle. He whispered to his attorney, never breaking eye contact. Then he smirked up. I knew that smirk. I'd seen it in every press conference, every photo op, every time he called me a disruption without ever saying my name. But today, I had one thing he didn't: truth, and truth had paperwork. The state had built a solid case, one that went far beyond my arrest. There were testimonies, emails, financial records, call logs, video clips. Witness after witness took the stand, former deputies, clerks, residents, even a few who had once stood by him. The story unfolded like a wound being cleaned, painful, but necessary. Rourke's team objected, dismissed, delayed. They painted him as a victim of politics, a scapegoat for the town's growing divisions. His attorney called me an unreliable narrator and a known agitator. But the facts didn't care about spin. When it was my turn to testify, the courtroom grew still. The judge asked if I needed a break before starting. I shook my head. I looked across the room at Rourke, then to the jury. 12 strangers who didn't know me, didn't owe me anything, but held the power to decide whether my years of fear, effort, and loss had been worth it. My voice didn't shake. I told them everything. From the morning of the protest to the night I sent that first anonymous email. I walked them through every step, Every document, every conversation I could remember. I didn't perform. I didn't plead, I just told the truth, and when I spoke about Maya, about the fear in her voice the night someone defaced our home, I saw something shift in the room. Even Rourke looked away. The prosecution rested their case. And for the first time, I felt the weight lift slightly from my chest, but then Rourke took the stand. He was composed. He knew how to talk in a courtroom. Every answer was polished. Every sentence designed to plant doubt. No knowledge of those decisions. Standard operating procedures. Deeply regret if anyone felt targeted. It was theater. But effective. By the end of his testimony, I could feel it in the room, doubt seeping back in, soft as fog. Later that day, my lawyer turned to me and whispered, "This could go either way." I nodded. Because I knew, the truth doesn't always win on the first try, and men like Rourke don't just fall. They have to be pushed. The trial lasted 9 days. I sat in that courtroom for every second. I watched the jury. Their body language. The way they leaned forward or sat back. I tried not to guess, but I couldn't help it. My life was being weighed in their expressions. On the 7th day, Maya testified behind closed doors. She had insisted. My lawyer had been against it, worried it would be too much for her, but Maya looked him in the eye and said, "He made my mom afraid." I want them to know that. When she returned home that night, she didn't say much. Just handed me her sweater and asked what we were having for dinner, but her presence had changed the rhythm of the trial. The jury had seen what this was really about, not just legal misconduct, but intimidation, harm, abuse of trust. On the 9th day, closing arguments began. The prosecutor spoke first, walking the jury back through every exhibit, every witness, every moment where Rourke's choices were not just questionable but deliberate. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words landed like quiet thunder. Then Rourke's lawyer stood, all charm and smiles. He told the jury this was about personal resentment. That my story was emotional but unverified. That Sheriff Rourke was a man who served his town faithfully, who now faces falsehoods crafted by those who fear his strength. And yet the jury didn't nod. They listened, but their faces stayed flat. When it ended, I didn't speak. I just walked outside, into the sunlight, and sat on a stone bench. My hands were cold. My knees trembled. But I breathed deeply. The jury would deliberate. And there was nothing more I could do. Nothing except wait. It took them 3 days. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, we were called back. The courtroom was silent when the foreperson stood. I didn't move. My fingers locked together, white-knuckled in my lap. Maya gripped my arm. The judge asked for the verdict, and the word that followed was simple: guilty. It echoed. Quiet at first, then louder, as if it filled the space between every heartbeat. The charges were read. The counts listed one by one: misuse of public office, tampering with evidence, retaliation against a citizen. All followed by the same verdict: guilty. I turned to Maya. Her eyes were wide, her lips parted, and then, slowly, she smiled. Rourke's face was unreadable. His expression frozen, his hands clenched tightly at his sides. His lawyer reached for his shoulder, whispered something, but he didn't respond. For a moment, it was like he couldn't move. Then the judge ordered him taken into custody pending sentencing. 2 deputies stepped forward. Rourke didn't resist. But as they led him away, he turned, finally, and looked at me, not with anger, with disbelief. As if he couldn't comprehend what had happened. As if he truly believed this day would never come, and maybe he did. Maybe that's the most dangerous thing about unchecked power. It convinces those who hold it that they're untouchable, but no one is untouchable, especially not anymore. Victory doesn't feel like a parade. It feels like an exhale after holding your breath for too long. The morning after the verdict, I woke up before sunrise. For a moment, lying there in the stillness of my bedroom, I didn't remember. Then it hit me. The weight that had sat on my chest for so many months was gone. It had lifted quietly, without fireworks or celebration, but it had lifted. Maya was still asleep, her hair tangled on her pillow, her breathing deep and even. I sat on the edge of my bed, hands clasped, unsure of what to do with this strange new freedom. For so long, my days had revolved around fighting. Every choice, every step had been about survival, about keeping the truth alive long enough for someone to hear it. Now that the battle was over, I faced a different kind of uncertainty. What comes after the fight? Outside, the sky was soft and gray, the first hints of spring finally breaking through the stubborn chill of winter. I made coffee. I sat by the window. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to just sit.no lists. No strategies. No fears pressing against my ribs, just quiet. Still, the world around me hadn't forgotten. By noon, reporters were back on the streets, knocking on doors, asking for quotes. The local paper ran a front-page story titled, "Sherif Convicted. A Town Reckons with Its Past." Some neighbors waved to me from their porches as I walked to the mailbox. Others still turned away. I didn't blame them. It's easy to live comfortably when you never have to question what's beneath the surface. It's harder when someone forces you to see the cracks you've ignored. I didn't expect everyone to thank me. I didn't even expect everyone to believe me. I had done what I needed to do, not for applause, but for something quieter. Something harder to measure. I had done it so Maya and children like her would grow up knowing that power is not the same thing as right. That silence is not the only option. Later that week, we packed our bags. It wasn't an escape. It was a promise. Maya and I took a road trip, just the two of us. I rented a small cabin near a lake 2 states over. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours for a week. No phones. No news. Just quiet hikes, campfires, and long conversations under the stars. The first night, sitting on the porch wrapped in a blanket, Maya asked, "Are you glad it's over?" I thought about that, about the months of fear. About the friends I lost. About the nights I cried in the shower so she wouldn't hear me. About the days I wanted to give up, but didn't. I looked at her, this fierce, brave girl who had stood beside me through it all, and I answered honestly, "I'm glad we didn't give up." She smiled. A real smile. One that lit up her whole face. That was enough for me. When we returned home, things were different. The food pantry reopened stronger than before. Donations returned. Volunteers returned. Some people I had never even met stopped me in the grocery store, thanking me, offering support. The town that once whispered behind my back now held its head a little higher. There were still scars. There always would be. But there was pride too. And that mattered more. Legally, the aftermath moved quickly. Sheriff Rourke was sentenced to several years for multiple counts of misconduct. He also faced several civil suits, including mine. The civil suit wasn't about money. It was about acknowledgement. About making sure that what happened to me and to so many others was officially recorded, not buried under political spin. We won that case too. The settlement wasn't massive, but it was enough. Enough to stabilize the pantry. Enough to cover Maya's college savings. Enough to build something new. The final hearing when Rourke entered the courtroom in handcuffs, wearing the plain jumpsuit of someone stripped of power, I felt no triumph. No hatred. Only clarity. He was not the center of my story. He never had been. The real story was about the people who refused to stay silent. About a community learning to heal. About a girl who lent her notebooks to her mother because she believed the truth mattered, and about a woman who had been broken but never destroyed. On the steps of the courthouse, a reporter thrust a microphone toward me. He asked if I had anything to say to those still skeptical, still angry that the sheriff they admired had fallen. I paused, chose my words carefully. "I didn't come here to tear anyone down," I said. "I came here to make sure no one else would be afraid to stand up." That was it. Simple. True. The reporter nodded, and the crowd parted to let me pass. Months later, when the dust had settled and the media moved on to other stories, I found myself back where it all began, standing in front of City Hall. Now hosting a new initiative for immigrant support services. The same spot where I had been arrested. The same bricks, the same air, but a different town, a better one. I stood there holding a folder full of grant proposals, talking to a group of young volunteers who had never known the fear I had felt that day. They only knew the change that had come after. I saw hope in their faces, and I realized something. Fighting back had never been about winning a court case. It had never been about headlines or settlements. It had been about shifting the ground beneath our feet, making it solid enough for others to stand on. It had been about love. Love for my daughter. Love for my neighbors. Love for a future that dared to be better. When the event ended, I locked the doors, turned off the lights, and walked home under a sky full of stars. Maya waited for me on the porch, homework spread out in front of her, a mug of cocoa by her side. She looked up as I climbed the steps. "How was it?" she asked. I sat down beside her, breathing in the cool night air. "It was good," I said. "It was really good." And for the first time in a long time, I knew it was true.